Aria Delacroix was discharged from the hospital and immediately went to visit her father at the detention center. Archibald Delacroix looked thinner and a bit worn, but his health was stable. That put Aria at ease. She quickly returned to her busy routine, working at the music center during the day and juggling several private students at night. Along with her job at the restaurant, it was exhausting, but the extra income was necessary. Before she knew it, a week had passed. She hadn't seen Xavier Ashford during that time, but his name had appeared in the entertainment section of the newspaper. That's when she learned he had gone to Sea City. He had attended an exclusive high society gala dressed in a black velvet suit, crisp pleated white shirt and a classic black bow tie. He stood out effortlessly, a man who exuded sophistication and privilege. At his side was a stunning woman. His hand rested lightly on her waist and they looked like the perfect match. Aria recognized her, a top-tier actress and former Best Actress award winner. The woman leaned against Xavier, her expression filled with ambition, the kind that desired more than just fame. Aria quietly set the newspaper aside. It was a good thing, she thought, that she had never let herself believe she was special to him. A man like Xavier Ashford was naturally surrounded by women. It was only logical. 2 days later, during her shift at the restaurant, Xavier Ashford appeared. Dressed in a deep blue shirt and slate gray trousers, a black overcoat draped over his shoulders, he looked effortlessly refined. He came alone. Although he ordered food, he barely touched it, instead sitting back in his chair, quietly listening to her play the piano. Aria had no idea why he was there, so she chose to ignore the weight of his gaze. At 10 o'clock the restaurant closed. After tidying up, she prepared to head home. By the time she stepped outside, the seat where Xavier had been sitting was empty. She let out a small breath of relief. Though a part of her felt she had been rude, perhaps she should have at least thanked him for looking after her in the hospital. Just as she was about to leave, a Bentley Continental pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Xavier Ashford's striking features. "Get in," he said simply. Aria hesitated, then got into the passenger seat. His car was too eye-catching. If they lingered outside, it would attract attention. Xavier started the car and after a moment, glanced at her seatbelt. Face flushing, she hurriedly buckled up. She stole a glance at him. His coat was casually thrown onto the back seat, leaving him in just his shirt and trousers. Xavier smirked. "Like what you see?" Aria's cheeks burned even hotter. At a red light, Xavier turned slightly toward her, his gaze holding an unspoken intensity. Flustered, she tried to steer the conversation in another direction. "Attorney Ashford, I wanted to thank you for that day." Xavier didn't respond. Pushing through the silence, she added, "There's a bus stop ahead. I can take the night bus from here." His gaze darkened, then he finally spoke. "Aria Delacroix, stay with me for a while." He said her full name and just like that her resolve wavered. Under the moonlight, Xavier drove them to a quiet hillside. The place was deserted, perfect for mischief. Aria belatedly realized her mistake. Xavier, seemingly in a brooding mood, lit a cigarette. His long fingers held the cigarette with an effortless grace, bringing it to his lips in slow, rhythmic motions. The night air was chilly. Dressed in a skirt, Aria soon felt the cold. Her nose turned pink and a slight flush crept into her cheeks. Xavier tossed his coat over her. "Wear it." "Thanks," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. Something about him felt different tonight. And she was right, because the moment he finished his cigarette, he leaned in and kissed her. Dazed, she weakly pushed against his chest, whispering, "Xavier, what are we?" Xavier studied her silently. He knew she wasn't ready for this. Xavier Ashford and Aria Delacroix's subtle relationship. Xavier Ashford quietly watched Aria Delacroix for a moment, then released her arm and leaned back against the leather chair, closing his eyes slightly. He seemed a bit tired and Aria didn't scold him. Instead, she turned her head to look at him, feeling somewhat confused inside. After a while, Xavier pressed a button inside the car, and the roof opened, replaced by a deep blue glass. The stars twinkled in the night sky and the view was beautiful. Xavier remained silent, his gaze fixed on the sky above. Aria wanted to speak but was suddenly pulled into his embrace. She rested her head on his shoulder, inhaling the scent of wood on him. Her face naturally flushed. "Stay with me for a while." Xavier's voice was husky, carrying a hint of pleading. Aria felt she couldn't refuse him. She didn't know why. perhaps because he had helped her before, or maybe it was his exhaustion that stirred her compassion. In his arms, she felt a complicated surge of emotions. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked softly. Aria froze for a moment, quickly responding, "Nothing, nothing at all." A quiet atmosphere enveloped them as they embraced tightly. Aria knew that Xavier's charm was undeniable. Even though she felt somewhat confused and was drawn in by his strong masculine presence, she didn't push him away. She subtly wrapped her hand around his waist, savoring the moment of peace and comfort. However, despite the alluring and ambiguous connection between them, Aria knew the distance between them was too great and a future was unlikely. She drifted off to sleep in his arms, while Xavier lowered his head to look at her with a soft gaze. When Aria woke up, there was a subtle atmosphere in the air. She could still feel Xavier's intense gaze on her and couldn't help but softly ask, "What time is it?" "It's almost 1 in the morning. Wait a little longer and I'll take you home," Xavier replied softly. Aria obediently rested in his arms, not daring to move. Xavier seemed to be in a better mood suddenly, and he chuckled lightly. "So easy to bully? Are you repaying me, or are you enjoying it yourself?" Aria's thoughts were exposed with those words, and her face turned red. She awkwardly moved to the front passenger seat. "Attorney Ashford, please take me home," she tried to cover up her unease. He smiled slightly, gazing at her flushed face. Something undefined stirred in his heart. When he dropped her off, he noticed that her place was far from what he had imagined. Though he had considered offering help, he ultimately kept quiet. "I've arrived, thank you, Attorney Ashford," Aria said softly. Xavier looked down at her, a trace of sympathy in his heart, but he knew that she wasn't truly dependent on him yet. Back home, Aria wearily took off her shoes. As she was about to go upstairs, she suddenly stopped and glanced downstairs. Xavier's car was still parked outside, the golden Bentley standing in stark contrast to the dilapidated neighborhood. She couldn't help but think to herself, Xavier Ashford shouldn't be here. However, she didn't dwell on it and hurried upstairs, only to spot a black sports car parked downstairs. The owner was Talon, who had been waiting for several hours. Talon sneered as he watched the lights come on upstairs. "Only a short time, and Aria Delacroix has already fallen for Xavier Ashford? Isn't she supposed to be in love with me?" He dialed a number and coldly said, "It's time to move." Back at home, Aria exchanged a few simple words with Amelia. Seeing the exhaustion on her face, Amelia asked with concern if she needed some late-night snacks. Aria shook her head gently but inwardly sighed. She knew Amelia had some questions, but she wasn't ready to answer. After all, her relationship with Xavier Ashford was complicated and distant. Suddenly, her phone screen lit up with a message from Xavier Ashford. "Are you asleep?" Attached was a photo of the night view he had taken from his apartment's balcony, glowing with lights, looking particularly charming. Aria hesitated for a moment before replying, "Sorry, Attorney Ashford, I've fallen asleep." Xavier Ashford smiled as he read the message, his lips curling slightly. He smiled at her modesty. Over the next few days, although Xavier didn't appear again, he occasionally sent a text or two, each one carrying a touch of the mature man's charm. A few days later, Aria received a call from Xavier Ashford on her way to work. His warm voice came through the phone. "I'm going on a business trip for a week. When I return, let's meet. I have something I need to discuss with you." Aria answered softly, a bit puzzled. What did he want to discuss with her? At that moment, Xavier was in his car, flipping through the files for the Archibald Delacroix case. He made a quiet decision that when he returned, he would meet her. For him, this wasn't just a business transaction. It was a form of compensation. However, what Aria didn't know was that her every move had already caught the attention of others. While she was busy with work, she suddenly found out that her part-time job outside had been discovered by the company's director. The director expressed dissatisfaction, and Aria quietly left, feeling deeply uneasy about the decisions she would have to make in the future. Director Lee's voice carried an unmistakable hint of anger. "Do you know what leaving the music center means? Do you have any idea how many people will envy you for having access to such high-quality students?" Aria Delacroix understood the implications, but she could only lower her head and apologize, choking up and unable to say anything further. Director Lee was clearly more agitated, lighting a cigarette and taking a few puffs before speaking coldly. "Aria Delacroix, who have you offended? Who stabbed you in the back?" Aria Delacroix didn't answer directly. She already knew in her heart that everything behind this was related to Talon. She understood that this was only the beginning, and Talon would use more methods to pressure her. Finally, Director Lee sighed. To appease the parents, you must leave. If there's another opportunity, I'll try to help you. But both of them understood that after this incident, it would be nearly impossible for Aria Delacroix to rise again. When Aria Delacroix left Director Lee's office, her face was pale, and her colleagues expressed their sympathy, except for Narcissa, who wore a mocking smile. You should know the rules around here, right? Offended the wrong people, and look at where you've ended up now. Aria Delacroix took a deep breath and coldly replied, You're working with Talon, aren't you? Aren't you afraid of being devoured without leaving even a bone behind? Narcissa, however, smiled lightly and moved closer, whispering with derision, Aria Delacroix, you don't know, do you? While you were with Talon, I already had a thing with him. She enunciated each word clearly. I have been with him. These words hit Aria Delacroix like a hammer to the chest. She suppressed the nausea but coldly responded, Congratulations. With pain and anger, she grabbed her bag ready to leave, but was suddenly yanked by Narcissa's arm. Not only that, but Narcissa also sneered, Look at you, so lucky, got Director Lee's favor and Talon's love. Too bad now, you're just a lost dog. Aria Delacroix's face changed slightly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she coldly sneered, I wish you two a lifetime of happiness. With that, she pushed Narcissa away and quickly left. Narcissa, her face turning blue with anger, still felt satisfied. Aria Delacroix's position had collapsed, leaving only a heap of ruins. Aria Delacroix lost her job, but she didn't want to worry Amelia, so she hadn't told her. She sat alone on a park bench. The sun was shining brightly, but she felt a sudden chill. Counting the family's financial situation, Aria Delacroix realized she was strapped for cash, especially with the fees for Harrison Sinclair law firm coming due, and there were also many bills at home that needed to be paid. She ran her fingers over the pale pink diamond necklace around her neck, and with a heavy heart she decided to pawn it. The pawn shop offered a price that made her feel even heavier, but she still decided to accept it. After selling the necklace, she received a check for $200,000, and then went straight to the law firm to pay the fees. Just as she was about to leave, Skylar called, knowing she had lost her job and inviting her to dinner. They sat in a hot pot restaurant and Skylar angrily cursed Narcissa. That bitch, I never liked her in college. While you were with Talon, she secretly hooked up with him multiple times. Aria Delacroix smiled faintly. Now she got what she wanted. She told Skylar what Narcissa had said to her. Skylar froze for a moment, then angrily said, Talon is such a piece of trash, he deserves to be with Narcissa. But no matter what, we shouldn't waste time being sad for someone like him. Aria Delacroix gently nodded, but her heart was still filled with pain and guilt. What she didn't expect was that even worse things were yet to come. Her part-time job at the restaurant fired her as well. Skylar was furious and wanted to seek justice for her, but Aria Delacroix stopped her. She knew that Talon was doing all of this to force her to compromise and accept his role as the man in the affair. Skylar was so angry she started crying. How could Talon do this? He doesn't deserve you. That night, Aria received a call from Talon. His voice was tinged with coldness. Aria Delacroix, if you beg me, I can solve everything for you. I'll double what you've lost. Don't you remember the good times we had? Aria Delacroix sneered. Is it good when I'm waiting for you at home for dinner, but you're in bed with Narcissa? Talon's voice grew even colder. Who told you that? Aria Delacroix smiled faintly. What do you think? Then she hung up. Her heart was as calm as water, as if she had seen through the absurdity of this love-hate entanglement. At this moment, Talon angrily slammed the phone down, his eyes flashing with a sharp light. He no longer cared about Narcissa and motioned for her to come in. Narcissa, dressed appropriately, immediately hugged Talon tightly upon entering and whispered, Not feeling well? You're always too busy when I try to make plans with you. Talon didn't answer but bent down to kiss her. As the kiss deepened, Talon's eyes grew colder. Did you tell Aria Delacroix about us? Narcissa's gaze became alert, a hint of suspicion creeping into her eyes. Talon, why are you bringing her up? Let's continue. However, as she spoke, Talon suddenly grabbed her hair and slammed her head down onto the cold desk, causing her forehead to crash into the surface, blood spraying out.